I think this is a really kind of great exercise to ask yourself, like, not just, what are some examples of climate change that we see on the news, right? Because that's kind of one removed from us a lot of the time. But, what are some examples that, we have personally seen with our own eyes, in our own lifetime?
Welcome to What Do We Do Next? This week we are joined by Sam Monier, PhD, a wildlife biologist whose work spans birds, primates, and complex systems from polar seas to dense cities. She holds a master's from Columbia University and a PhD from City University of New York. Her research and fieldwork have taken her from the Antarctic ice to New York rooftops, focusing on how species adapt or fail to adapt to rapid environmental change. Sam's core message: climate change isn't one problem and it won't have one solution. Plastic pollution, urbanization, rising temperatures, invasive species, biodiversity loss, and even space debris are interconnected yet distinct challenges. Solving them requires both individual action and systemic change. On the science side, she also speaks candidly about the realities of academic labor, how the way we fund and value scientists shapes who gets to do this work. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Thanks for coming on the show today, Sam.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
I'm super impressed with your, body of work and everything you've been so dedicated to for as long as I've known you, which is a very long time. And so, let's get right into it. Let's talk about climate change and why should we care right now? Why does it matter so much for you right now?
Yeah, so I think that one of the most important things that I can stress is, unpacking the multifaceted aspects of anthropogenic change. I think most people hear climate change and they think global warming. And some people may be feeling that right now, and some people maybe not so much. But when you think of all of the different ways that the planet is changing, I think, you'd be hard pressed to find any species or any individual on this planet that hasn't been affected by, anthropogenic change one way or another.
So what is, for the dummies in the audience like me, what does anthropogenic change mean? What does that include?
Yeah, so you have things like global warming, that's rising temperatures, but then you also have things like habitat and biodiversity loss. So that's urbanization, deforestation, desertification, and then you have all of the different types of pollution. I could name 1,000 different types of pollution: plastic pollution, light pollution, noise pollution, chemical pollution affecting the water, the air, and all of these are contributing to our changing world, and they're all interconnected but really distinct challenges. And because the problem is multifaceted, you also need multifaceted solutions, and that is going to require, I think, both individual action as well as larger systemic changes.
I think that's important because sometimes it feels like, well, what can one person do? Well, maybe more than we think, right? Maybe those individual changes add up to big movements, and maybe you inspire other people to do kind of the same thing. So in regards to, climate change, plastic pollution, urbanization, like, how do you prioritize those solutions without, oversimplifying the trade-off?
Ooh, that's a deep question. How do you prioritize the solution? Well, I think that the benefit of there being so many different problems, if I can call it a benefit, is that means that there's a million ways for people to get involved in whatever way makes sense for them. So I mean, obviously, governments and countries are going to have priorities, but I would say, as individuals, one thing, I'll give an example. It's about, how we really shouldn't be kind of putting people down for getting involved in ways that maybe we don't think should be the priority right now, as long as they're kind of moving the ball forward. So an example I'll give is, it's less of a hot issue right now, but a few years ago, plastic straw bans were going viral. I don't know if you remember that. Major cities were talking about banning them. And, I honestly personally don't really understand the issue. In my mind, restaurants can keep a small supply of plastic straws on hand available upon request. I don't see why they need to be put into people's drinks on, by default. I don't understand why the restaurants want to spend the money to do that. But whatever it is, major cities were talking about banning these plastic straws, to quote unquote save the environment. And there were these very popular kind of memes and people saying things online, saying stuff like, well, why should I forego my plastic straws just because like private jets exist? And I get why people are feeling hurt by that, because they feel like, they are being unfairly regulated compared to major polluters, right? So they're basically saying, well, I'm just using a few plastic straws in my lifetime, and so why come after me, for
Right.
this? You
Right,
should
Bob
be
Dole's on his private jet, right? Exactly.
Yeah. But the reason that I hate that argument is because the person who's saying it is really conflating two issues. So there's global warming, right, which is worsened by private jet emissions. But then there's plastic pollution. And we could ban all airline traffic tomorrow, and seabirds and sea turtles will still die of plastic ingestion, and our waterways are still going to be clogged with litter, and microplastics will still find their way into our brains, and banning plastic straws can help with those issues. And so I think if someone wants to champion the plastic straw issue, we should be grateful, instead of telling them to like shut up and be on the side of straw companies. Which, by the way, those factories do emit CO2, so it does contribute to global warming on a larger scale than you might see, because you're only taking one straw, but the factory is probably, producing 1,000.
Right.
So I think that we should, embrace whichever way our friends and neighbors and, different people want to get involved in this. Like, we should be thankful that, someone is willing to champion one of those issues, and then we can champion the issues that, we care about more personally.
Right, because I think we're really good at correcting people all the time. You can't say that, you can't do this, and you say one thing and people are like, what about Gaza? And you're like, hold on, man. That's a different topic. That's a different subject. And we can get into it, but that has nothing to do with plastic straws right now. Let's stay on focus. And we're really good at policing each other and correcting each other, even people, especially people on the left, quite frankly, right? We're really bad about that. And at the end of the day, it's like, I have a friend who's handicapped and she has to use straws, and she has 4 metal ones in her purse, and she really doesn't give a shit about this plastic straw ban. You know what I mean? The one person who should care doesn't, because she comes prepared, because she understands what her needs are, right? So it's the people that we're supposedly fighting for, are they even asking for that fight? And we're just really confusing the issue, when maybe we should be talking about our house cats. Right? Maybe we should be talking about okay, yeah, I don't use that many straws, but how many animals did your cat kill last year?
Yeah, that is a crazy statistic that you bring up about cats. So there is this paper that was written in a very prestigious science journal by scientists that work at the Smithsonian and Fish and Wildlife. How many cats do you think? How many birds do you think house cats in the U.S. kill every year? Just in the U.S. alone. We're talking about, domestic house cats. How many birds die by a cat's hand?
Individual cats,
No,
kill
total
count?
number
Or
of birds that die.
Oh, God, I don't even know. I mean, my dog kills birds, so, I can't even imagine, honestly.
The number is in the billions, just in the U.S. alone, killing, and then that's not even counting the mammals that get killed by cats. And so it's an astounding number. And I will say that this paper was written, several years ago at this point, and it's not exactly my area of expertise. I do study birds, but not bird-cat predation. But, I bring it up because it's an example of anthropogenic change that isn't global warming, and there's some really obvious solutions. Keep your cat indoors if you can. Although, interestingly, this study said it was really the stray cats that were more of a problem than house pets.
Well, they're
so
surviving.
What does that mean?
Right. They're trying to survive. They're trying to feed themselves.
Right, exactly. If your house cat, has access to food indoors, it'll probably be less likely to kill a bird than a stray cat. But so what does that mean? It means trying to get stray cats off the streets. through, again, whatever solution you can think of, adoption programs, spay and neuter programs. Like, there's a million different ways that you can get involved if this is an issue that you care about. And, billions of birds is a huge number, and it is something that, like, eventually we will see. Eventually you'll look out your window and you'll realize, there's less birds, fewer small mammals than there were 20 years ago.
And speaking of which, let's talk about some of the changes that you've seen in your own lifetime, like that you've personally seen. You've been studying this for a long time, so you probably pay more attention than the rest of us, right? But what are some of these examples of climate change and anthropogenic changes that you've seen?
Yeah, so I think this is a really kind of great exercise to ask yourself, like, not just, what are some examples of climate change that we see on the news, right? Because that's kind of one removed from us a lot of the time. But, what are some examples that, we have personally seen with our own eyes, in our own lifetime, so in just, a couple of decades, that the environment has changed. So for me, I was born and raised in New York City. Definitely there's less snow during New York City winters than there were growing up. I used to think, like, in October, you would put on your snow boots and you would take out your heavy coat and you would wear it until March because the snow would start and it would never go away. And now you could walk out in ballet flats. Maybe you need the snow boots one day, but then it's followed by a 40-degree sunny day and the snow melts and you can put them away again. So there's definitely less snow in New York City. Actually, New York City, that area was, like, scientifically reclassified recently is now officially a subtropical climate. So I forget what the designation used to be. Maybe it was something temperate related. I don't remember the original name, but now, like, the New York City area is officially, like, a subtropical region, and it's defined that way based off of, what are the average temperatures in the winter, what are the average temperatures in the summer, and those have changed so much that it's kind of pushed us into newly classified kind of climate zone. I will also say, yeah, it's crazy. I will also say, there's been a pop-up and encroachment of new invasive species that did not used to exist when I was a kid. Spotted lanternflies, Japanese knotweed. The wildfires affecting New York City was never an issue, and now, we're getting kind of air quality alerts, and people are being told to stay indoors, for a few days in the summer because of wildfires in Canada, in Jersey, and all those things. So I think, brainstorming how your environment has personally changed, I think, can really help people understand the gravity of the situation and how far-reaching it is. What about you?
Yeah.
What have you noticed, in your own lifetime?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, like, I grew up in the suburbs of Northern Virginia and then lived in D.C. in the city for 20 years. And then now I'm in Costa Rica. And so, like, every once in a while, I'll like, go outside and film a video in the morning or, like, go live for a few minutes. And whenever I listen to it back, it sounds like I'm at the zoo. It's like, there's so many, you kind of tune it out when you live here, but it's like, there are so many different animals, birds. I mean, it's just... there's geckos in my house that make noise that you, like, when everybody realizes, like, 6 months after moving here, like, oh, that's what a gecko making that noise? Because, like, you're just not used to these things, You're not used to, like, living in nature when you come from a city, right? So, like, I saw an article the other day, and because Mayor Bowser planted, like, 10,000 trees or something, which is amazing, but they're all, like, male trees or female trees that are releasing pollen, and so everybody's allergy problems have been going up year after year. So yes, DC is a very green city, but it was also planted with one type of so it's like it's kind of like the more they try to make things better, it sometimes just makes things worse. But yeah, less snow for sure, less snow. The pollen for sure.
So for you, it also sounds like it's about, you didn't realize how urban your area was, especially if it kind of sounds tricky because you're right, you look out your door, you see trees, you think it's not that bad. Until you move to somewhere that's more untouched, but still like a city, you're not literally living in the middle of an untouched, undeveloped rainforest. There's still people where you are, but when you can compare that to where you were, you didn't realize how developed you were growing up.
Well, and just, I was at RFK last year. A friend of mine has the National Cannabis Festival, so every year I fly back and I help her out. And I was standing there in the morning drinking my coffee, regretting my life decisions for being up at 4 a.m. In a parking lot. And I was standing in this like green field of grass because RFK has 7 miles of parking lot. And I just had this moment, like this like stoner moment, but I was like, there's not a single trace of life in this entire field. There's not an ant, there's not a bug, there's nothing but Roundup and sturdy grass. And it just sort of like all of a sudden you like look up and you look around and it's like, there's no life in this land. It has been nuked relentlessly for 30 years. And because in Costa Rica, you sit down, you're going to have a whole ass full of fire ants. You know what I mean? You're going to have some problems. You sit down even on the beach, you got sand flea. I mean, life is teeming here. And so, yeah, it's just like, well, wait a minute. Like, everything is just sprayed with Roundup. Everything is just, like, killed. Like, it's a lot of chemicals. There's no life in any of this, And I've also started thinking a lot about, like, when you live in a city, you can be kind of a bougie jerk, and you're like, oh, I only eat organic and farm sourced, and yeah, but everything that we eat in Washington D.C. is brought in on a truck. Every single thing. Nothing is grown there. Nothing is coming from there. We are totally part of the problem while like judging other people, thinking that because they're not eating like organic grass-fed Wagyu beef from Trader Joe's, that they're not getting it right. But meanwhile, everything was brought in on a truck. Where here, like the coffee that I drink, I can like see the farm roughly where it came from. Like, you know what I mean? Like I can eat the avocados from my yard. I can eat like the mangoes from my yard. Like I know, even when I go to the store, I'm like, this came from somebody's property nearby. Now, Costa Rica also has like insane pesticide issues. Like I'm not going to sugarcoat that, but like when you live in a rural place like this, a lot of times you're buying like that farmer's crop. And he probably didn't use that much pesticide because it's very expensive, to be honest. You know what I mean? But like, are the bigger companies using it? Yes. But, it's this constant conversation of like, how am I part of the problem? How am I not? Like I thought about getting a cat too. And one of my friends, she's Venezuelan, and she was like, I love my cats. And she keeps them indoors. And she's like, cats are insanely dangerous and like detrimental to environments, and you won't have any like birds on your property. You won't have hummingbirds anymore. You won't have lizards. You won't have any of that. And I was like, oh well, forget that. You know what I mean? I don't want that. So yeah, it's like, how do you find that balance? Because we do like to judge. Somebody shows up with their mason jar and we're all like rolling their eyes, but like.
Right, it's something they're trying. Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting because this is one of the like roles that science can play, not just science, but also like historians or journalists or a lot of people. There's this concept called shifting baselines, and it's this idea that you can't appreciate the gravity of how bad things are unless you have some sort of understanding of how good things once were. And how do you do that? But by documenting things in ways that will be preserved for decades. And so the classic example in conservation is with like fisheries. And so let's say, your grandparents were fishermen, and, they used to catch these giant fish, and the giant fish were plentiful. And then your parents were also fishermen, and they caught kind of medium fish, and they were, moderately plentiful. And by the time you become a fisherman, the fish are small and scarce. But if you never spoke to your grandfather, how would you know that they used to be huge? Your normal would have been readjusted. Your baseline is now, this is just how things are. And a good day for you would have been an awful fishing day for your grandparents. But unless that communication exists, and that means people going out and doing biodiversity surveys, it means historians kind of keeping and publishing records. If those records don't exist, then we don't know kind of how fast the train is going that we're on.
Well, that's terrifying with Trump, erasing everything and firing so many people and like literally removing the history. it's terrifying to really think about that, and I think that, it's such a good point. I think that's where like a lot of the youth is right now, right? Like they grew up on Reddit and like they saw crazy things that children should not see, and they got descent, and they've been involved in a school shooting, and then they get sent back to the same school where they saw their friends getting killed, and now they're all entering society, and we're wondering why people are shooting up schools and acting crazy, because everybody has collective trauma, right? And those kids just think that that's how the world is. Like they get shot at school. Violence is something that you make a light of because it's the only way that you can survive your PTSD, and the adults are all too busy arguing on Facebook, and so they are just like, they have this massive fuck it gene because they've never seen anything else, right? Where people in my generation are like, oh, I thought there was accountability. I thought there was civility. Like, I call me dumb, but I just thought like they can't do that was an actual thing, but apparently they can. They can do anything they want. So how do we protect that? How does an average person help protect the sciences? What do we do to, what the hell do we do next?
Yeah, I personally am just under the belief that like the number one thing we can do for this planet is to vote, and to vote for people who are going to pass climate friendly legislation, right? Because that's kind of how you get to the bigger systemic change. Again, I think you need both. I think our individual actions definitely matter, but it has to be coupled. It has to come from both the top down and the bottom up, I think. And voting for people that are going to pass climate friendly legislation means staying informed, basic things like knowing who your representatives are, at all levels, and also not just assuming because you live in a red area or a blue area that you can't have competitive elections at, multiple stages of government. You can have, a competitive local election, a competitive state election, a competitive federal election, in any area. Where I, was born and raised in Brooklyn, people think of New York City as being, this giant blue state, and yet Bay Ridge, Brooklyn is congressionally represented by a Republican. And I'm sure a lot of people just assume that New York City doesn't need any help in any of its elections. But, Bay Ridge has competitive local and state elections every year. And so you can't just assume kind of that you're being represented by someone that thinks a certain way or votes a certain way. Or even if, just because someone believes that climate change is real and man-made doesn't mean that they're going to make it a priority issue for them in kind of the legislation that they write. So just kind of electing people that, don't oppose the idea of climate change isn't enough. You really have to vote people that, have plans, whatever they are, whether it's kind of developing new parks or kind of taking more serious steps to, limit CO2, on all fronts.
Yeah, I think that really matters. Every year in the DC elections or whenever they come up, you get this huge ballot and you're like, I don't even know what any of these positions are for. I don't know who any of these people are. I don't know what I'm doing. And I think like that's kind of where it needs to change, right? Because the Republicans in a sense are winning right now because of things like Turning Point USA and the Leadership Institute, where they like the Leadership Institute is a conservative think tank, I think is how they refer to themselves. They've been around for 50 years, and they basically take young people and anybody with a desire to run for anything, or even if they're too young to know any better, and they indoctrinate them, and they give them money, and they groom them, and they train them, and they have them fill places like city councils and school boards and all the things that actually make things move. And so it's like the Scientology playbook, right? Like they do the exact same thing, and Democrats aren't really doing that. And so, yeah, you're right. There's lots of little elections, and we need to start holding these people accountable and asking them questions. So on that note, what would you ask? What would be some of the questions you would ask, to confirm that they are making it a priority?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think that, first of all, I'll say that, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, or certainly our representatives can, you know what I mean? And so I don't think that you have to have someone that is, the Al Gore of climate change. That would be awesome. But, I do think that you can expect your representatives to have to care about broad, sweeping issues that include climate change, just one of many things that we're thinking about. I'll tell you kind of a funny story. There was like a rally for some Democrats that I went to recently, and this one Democrat was calling out a Republican because they said the only thing that this Republican got done last year was pass some legislation on birds. And they were saying it like it was a bad thing. Like they were making fun of the fact that they didn't pass, anything that was, about healthcare or economics or housing. The only thing that this person got done last year, was to protect the birds. And it was just funny because, I'm an ornithologist, so I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, that's pretty good, But at the same time, like, I understand what this Democrat was upset about was that, there's everyone has got a priority issue. Not everyone can make climate change their number one issue because, it's, what's that saying that, by the time you can care about the environment, you have to personally be stable in your life. Otherwise, you yourself have to have food, you yourself have to have housing, you yourself have to have healthcare, and then you can care about, the impact that your lifestyle has on the planet. And I think that that's true and that's fair, right? Like nobody's asking anybody to prioritize climate change in lieu of, your mental health, your physical health, your safety, right? Human rights. Yeah, that was the word I'm looking for. But I do think that, again, we could walk and chew gum at the same time. It's got to be in the mix somewhere.
I agree. And listen, there's plenty of politicians that didn't get shit done last year. Or for many years. So, like, at least that dude did something, at least he did something. Yeah, well, it's that whole, like, not good enough thing, you know what I mean? It's like, you got to think and talk and walk exactly like I do, or, we're going to shame you for it. And it's like, well, like you said, we can walk and chew gum at the same time,
One
Hopefully.
thing that reminds me of, is one phrase that I hear thrown around a lot, and I always eye roll about it, is people say, well, if China isn't going to regulate X or if China isn't going to solve Y, well, then the US, we would be handicapping ourselves if we, imposed this climate legislation or if we agreed to sign this agreement. And, I just don't understand that argument. I mean, I guess I do understand it if you think of green regulations as a way of punishing capitalists instead of like an opportunity to innovate and make the world better and maybe probably still, make a profit. But it's just this idea that people think, well, if we can't solve everything, we shouldn't be trying to solve anything. But there is no solving anthropogenic change. There's no, we can make the temperature better, we can make the birds better, but like the planet is gonna move through time, and there is natural variations to things like temperature and biodiversity. Extinctions happen naturally. What we're going through now happens to be man-made, but like there always is going to be some variation of that. So there's no quote unquote solving climate change. It's just, but it's this idea that we give ourselves excuses to do nothing because we see someone else that's doing even less than us. And I think that's really got to change.
Yeah, and that's kind of the MO, right? Like you criticize Trump and then somebody goes, well, Biden. It was like, it's the same thing, right? It's like, can we just try to do better? Like, I don't want to have to, it's not one or the other. It's not if or, it's there has to be some, place in the middle. And I do believe it comes down to like respecting one another and not trashing somebody for caring. And like, let them care. And then you care about something else. Right. Not everybody's as passionate about like women as I am, right? And that's fine. Not everybody's as passionate about racism as I am and the patriarchy, and that's totally fine. I don't need them to be, but don't come for me and tell me how to talk. Don't tell me how to do it. I'm turning 50 this year. I will shut you all the way down. The gift of perimenopause is the greatest thing that's ever been given, because I used to like kind of appease those people, and they're like, well, you shouldn't say this way. I'm like, well, guess what? I just fucking did. You know what I mean? So here we are. We're not gonna do that. You know what I mean? You do your thing, I'll do mine, and then hopefully somewhere in the middle we can all meet up. But it definitely starts with respecting people. I'm like, who cares if somebody wants to use a metal straw, or like what, like who, I drink out of your mason jar. Like, I really can't be bothered. Good for you. I can't do it because I leave everything everywhere. Every time I buy one of those expensive water bottles, I lose it within 24 hours. I'm just not built to remember anything. So I just don't drink water when I'm not at home. That's my solution. But, you know, like, I don't judge anybody else for trying to make a difference. What the hell do I care? You know, I think if we could kind of get back to a little bit more of that empathy, too. And it takes a team. It takes a village, you know, like... You know, if you went to a barbecue and everybody showed up with hot dogs, it would be a pretty crappy barbecue, you know? So let people do what they want to do. So before we go, what would be one thing that you would recommend people to, outside of voting, what's one personal environmental change that they could make that might be easy or fun even?
Yeah, so, you know, I was trying to think of like, you know, what are some like going green tips or, you know, green lifestyle, you know, choices. I was trying to brainstorm them before our talk. You know, a quick story about me is I used to be obsessed with, you know, my carbon footprint and the amount of waste I generated, to the point where I actually thought going zero waste was achievable for me. And that's like, there are these books out there written by people who literally throw away like a single bag of trash a year, and everything else gets recycled or composted or donated. I really thought I could be one of those people. And, you know, you read all these books and you get all these checklists, and, you know, there's kind of the same few things on there, but, you know, reusable water bottle, you know, so you don't have to buy plastic water bottles, you know, handkerchiefs so that you're not using tissues, you know, cloth napkins so you can avoid, you know, paper napkins, travel cutlery, like you mentioned, you know, forks, knives, spoons, you know, so you don't have to, you know, get all those, tote bags. And I tried for a while to follow this, and then I realized that this list was written for someone who owns a car, not for someone with a small purse running around New York City, you know, who cannot possibly carry all of these things with me everywhere. And that's fine. Like, you know, you don't have to do it all, but I guarantee that there are kind of wasteful habits that everyone has that are really just that. They're just habits. You're thinking, you're acting without thinking. You're doing because it's a habit, but there are alternatives out there, you know, that are good for the planet and can make you happier. One example I have, a kind of weird one might be, is I have a non-hormonal IUD. It lasts 10 years, and it was free. And so if you think about it, that's 10 years of packaging that I'm saving. That's, you know, 10 years of not having to go to the store or the pharmacy to pick anything up. And, you know, another example that I do use cloth napkins and cloth handkerchiefs. I will never buy a paper napkin or a paper handkerchief again. But again, it's the cost. It's, you buy one set of very pretty cloth dinner napkins, and you buy them once and you have them for years, and you don't have to remember to buy more. You just wash them, you know, when you do wash regularly. I think there is something to be said, however, about, you know, putting your money where your mouth is. And I don't think that means bankrupting yourself to buy a brand new EV. You know, I still think that you can prioritize, you know, all these other things about your life, you know, your health, your, you know, savings. But I do think it's important to buy from companies that do the right thing.
Yeah, I'm with that. Moving here, I noticed more of those things like coffee. Everybody has those little coffee pod things, and like that's just so much trash, right? Yeah, like when you live here, everybody has very small trash cans. You know, like we don't have those giant, big roller. Like people have a metal grate on legs in front of their property that maybe 3 or 4 houses put their trash in, you know, and it's metal so that the animals can't get it. But I mean, they just create a lot less trash here because a lot of the food waste just goes into the yard. The coffee grinds go into the yard. Like it's a little bit different, you know, being here. But I think it's like a little bit of change, you know, one little change at a time.
It's something simple. Is just like, you know, maybe you go. Again, this is like a city thing, I guess, because I guess in most areas people do one giant supermarket shop. But like in New York City, you might run to the corner store and just get milk, and then they'll put it in a plastic bag, even though the milk has a handle. And it's like, so, and sometimes you don't want the bag, but then they put it in, and so you say, I'll just take it. But for just, think of it like 5 seconds, take 5 seconds, say, oh, you know what? I don't need that. And I will take the bag out. I'll take the milk out of the bag myself and return the bag back to them. And that's like, it's like an extra step that feels weird because they were trying to be helpful and they just did it. It's easier if I just walk away with it, but it literally takes 5 seconds to be like, oops, no, thank you, and just carry the milk by the handle instead of carrying the bag by the handle. I mean, there's small things, and again, like it's not going to save the planet, but it does, everyone's collective actions really do add up. Again, it's kind of like voting, when we talk about, how much do our individual actions matter? People ask that about voting all the time. It's like, does my one vote actually matter? And, if I think about it, I've never been in an election that has come down to a single vote. So I guess in that sense, like, my vote has never mattered because I've never voted for somebody that is won by my vote alone. And yet, if everyone felt that way, if everyone stayed home, we would find that our collective actions do matter. And I think it's, you can think of it that way. Like, you wouldn't tell somebody, oh, you can just stay home, it's no big deal. That's just like, maybe you shouldn't say, oh, you can just take that bag, it's not a big deal. Because it is and it isn't. It depends on if everybody else is also taking that bag or not. You can stay home, but then you're banking on everybody else showing up to vote. And that's, maybe not fair. Maybe we all have to be better, citizens and community members than that.
Yeah, one little step at a time, right? Like one little action at a time, it leads to bigger movements with lots of people. And that's how we make changes. That's how these things evolve. And I think it's like the influence too. It's, you got to normalize things, right? Like, I have no shame. So if people are like, why are you drinking out of mason jar? I'll be like, because I'm trying to save the planet, you wanker. You know what I mean? Where other people might not like the attention. But that's okay. I don't care. You can make fun of me all you want. I don't care. Drinking out of a mason glass. You know what I mean? What are you going to do about it? Nothing.
My favorite example of that is that I'm a vegetarian, and I've been a vegetarian for a very long time. And it used to be, I wouldn't say it was ever very difficult to be a vegetarian, but there certainly weren't their options that there are today. And like, for anyone that thinks, individual choices don't matter, look in the non-dairy aisle of the supermarket and see how many different milks that you can buy. Soy milk, almond milk, pistachio milk, chocolate soy milk, chocolate almond milk, banana soy milk. I mean, oat milk, mixtures, that are like half almond, half soy. It's insane. And like, I don't know that those companies are all doing it, for the good of the cows. There is a supply and demand there. What starts as a movement of people, that are making, choices for, quote unquote, the right reasons, turns into something that companies realize, can both maybe help the planet, depending on, how that milk is, how that, fake milk is manufacturing, but, also can make them a profit. And I think if you look at the vegetarian options in the frozen aisle or the non-dairy aisle now, like, those options were not there 10 years ago.
For sure. And I think, it's a huge market. I have clients in the CPG, which is like food packaging and stuff. And they like design the Kind bars and Essentia Water and like Russell Stover, right? Like all these legendary brands. And they go to Expo West every year in California, and it's the largest food expo. And I went one year and I was like, I was so overwhelmed by all the capitalism and the consumerism, because like Vita Water, the coconut water people, they like reserve like a huge section of the convention room floor, which is no less than $500,000 just for the footprint, and then they make a fake beach to like, and it's like the people that are going there are people who like order these things, and like they don't really give a shit about your fake beach, and you could have saved the $1 million that you spent on packaging, food, displays, flying people, like all, like it is such an insane amount of waste coming out of those things, you know what I mean? But every year, it's like one of the 7 halls is like natural foods. Now it's like 5. Right? Like it's, like people are definitely like leaning away from that. They want healthier, real food options. So yeah, you're right. Like we can move the market. Like just because it's what makes those people the most money right now doesn't mean that they won't shift their offerings, even if it's not based on belief. It could be based on the bottom line, which we all now know very clearly is the only thing that moves this country, because we're watching it be destroyed by 10 white dudes with way too much money, like in real time, right? So Yeah, I think you can move the market and you can make better choices and still have a profitable business or still contribute to society even with those micro movements.
I think as a consumer, you do have to be a little careful because there is like greenwashing, where it's when just because something is plant based, it's marketed as being eco friendly and healthy, which is not always true. You can have something that's plant based and unhealthy. You can have something that is, derived from, natural ingredients, but is still not good for the environment. And so, unfortunately, you do have to still kind of do your research. And again, just like everything, you can't assume, you have to make sure that, you're actually doing what you intend to do.
Yeah, there's an old clothing store in Falls Church where I grew up, Sims. I don't know if you remember Sims. And they would say, an educated consumer is our best customer. Listen, an educated consumer is the best habitant of this planet. You know what I mean? Because if Jimmy Kimmel and Disney, they lost $4 billion in 4 days, right? So maybe we do have a little bit more power than we realize, especially with our buying dollar. So, anything is possible. Well, Sam, thanks for coming on the show. This was really interesting. I really enjoyed it. If people want to connect with you and read some of your studies and things you've done, what's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, which is just my name, samanthamonier.com, and on it you can find my email, and you can also find all of my publications, most of which I've published open access, so anybody can just click on the link and read the articles that I've written.
That's amazing. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. It's always nice to see your face. Everybody doesn't realize until now, but we are family. We are related, and you're the smartest one in the family now. Sorry, rookie. Rookie's out. Sam's in. But it's so nice to spend time with you and get to have this conversation and all of those things. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you as well. This was my very first podcast.
Well, you did great. I love it. You're a natural. We'll get you on some more. People need to hear this, especially now when science is, the sciences and scientists, and it's we got to fight for these things. It matters, and if you have kids, you should really care. Like, sometimes I wonder because I'm like, I don't even have kids, and I'm more upset about school shootings and the environment than my friends with kids. And I'm like, I get you're busy, but like, you gotta have some skin in the game. Like, I don't know. I'm gonna be out. I'm a spinster. Okay, I got nothing.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, like, when you think of, like, the state of science and what that means for the livelihood of scientists that are often also professors, and what that means for, like, what your child is learning right now and who's training future scientists, current scientists that are worried about their jobs, that are maybe overworked and underpaid and losing their funding, are currently who is training future scientists. And it's a tricky spot that we're in right now, to say the least.
Indeed. So vote, people. Go out and vote. Get educated. Vote for the people that care about the things you care about. Get involved. Break out the mason jars. Buy a metal straw. Do whatever you can, but I think most importantly, don't shame people for doing stuff that you don't really understand. It's okay. We don't have to approve of everything. We can all do different things. So on that note, thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys are finding this content a nice break from the news feed that is every 10 minutes at this point. It's nothing but bad news in the world, so hopefully this was a nice break from that. Until next time, please be excellent to each other.